Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video will be entitled Handsome Johnny, Johnny Rosellie. Of course that's not his real name, right? Nobody in the CIA goes by their real name. They have their fake cover name and then they have their real name. Now there's a few exceptions to that. Sharon Tate, Abigail Folger, William Egan Colby, Richard Helms, they used their real names. Allen Dulles, he used his real name. John Foster Dulles of Princeton University, he used his real name. But many of the operatives elect to use fake names. So in the case of Johnny Rosellie, he was born Filippo Sacco, okay? He was born in Asperia, Lazio, Italy, which is approximately 65 miles north of Naples. It's slightly inland, so I would like to point out that Filippo Sacco, aka Handsome Johnny, was not born in a port facility. It's very rare. However, he was in close proximity to the ocean. I think he was about 20 miles inland. Anyway, what I wanted to tell you is that where to begin? I think we'll begin at the end of the Johnny Rosellie story. I think that's the fitting way to do it in a Columbo-esque presentation. Then we're going to get into context and the continuum of chaos, that is, the clandestine services. So let's discuss how Johnny Rosellie's life ended. He was under subpoena to testify for the Frank Church Committee, aka the Church Committee, looking into assassinations and CIA domestic activities. Now you do realize that the Frank Church Committee was completely infiltrated and controlled by the CIA at all times, and it never resolved any of the issues that, of course, a democracy would be concerned about. But it was great theater, theater of the absurd. It always is. And we even learned about the pneumatic electronic poison dart gun that William Colby himself testified and presented to the Church Committee. Unbelievable. Anyway, so Johnny Rosellie had testified for the Frank Church Committee 3 times, twice publicly, and the last time, which would be 90 days before his death, which we're not clear exactly on what day he died, but we're going to assume that he was murdered on July 28th, 1976, because that's when his sister reported him missing, and he was driving her car. So she would know she didn't have a car anymore because Johnny took it and never came home. So he probably was murdered, in the afternoon of July 28th, 1976 on Biscayne Bay, Miami, Florida. However, his body wasn't discovered until 10 days later on August 7th, 1976. So that's actually the date of death on the death certificate, because that's when his body was found inside a 55-gallon steel drum, floating in Biscayne Bay. I guess they didn't weight it down with enough chains or drill enough holes into the thing so that it would sink. So a little bit of a faux pas, but I'm pretty confident that Johnny Rosellie was dead when he was placed into the drum, because he was professionally murdered, and professionals always make sure that nobody survives. That's how you know it's professional. All right, so what I wanted to tell you is that his last testimony for the Church Committee was done in secret, so there are no transcripts that can be discussed. The New York Times boasts that they read them, but who believes anything that the New York Times writes? Not me. Anyway, so I'm reading to you from a New York Times article which was based on reading the secret transcripts and interviewing the people who seemed to know and were present for Johnny Rosellie's murder. Murder most foul. So remember, this follows in the death of many other CIA operatives known as Mafia figures. Most recently, Sam Giancana, not his real name. His real name is Gilmore Giangana, and it was changed to Salvatore Muni Giancana, and then he shortened that to Sam Giancana. Anyway, he was shot in the face 7 times with a .22 caliber pistol in his kitchenette basement unit by someone he knew and was cooking sausages and peppers and had dinner with, and was shot in the face somewhere around, I don't know, 9 or 10 p.m. He was discovered at 10 p.m. At night, and that occurred on June 19th, 1975. So then Johnny Roselli testified 3 times for the church committee, and like I said, he went missing on July 28th, 1976, so just about 1 year after Sam Giancana was murdered with a .22 caliber pistol, and Johnny Roselli was murdered. And I'm going to read to you, this is unsubstantiated, so it is plausible. So Johnny Roselli knew that he was 24/7 surveilled by CIA, because whenever we talk about the Mafia and Mafia hits or the alleged assassination attempts of Fidel Castro, just remember you're talking about the CIA. There is no Mafia, and there is no assassinations that are intentional unless they happen, okay? So it's very clear that Fidel Castro was a good soldier for the CIA, and that's why they didn't whack him, because he followed orders. People who don't follow orders tend to get whacked. So I'm not sure which orders Mr. Roselli, whose real name is Filippo Sacca, I don't know what he broke, but anyway, according to the transcripts here, Johnny Roselli was staying with his sister. He always, when he went to dinner, had the reservations put in his sister's name. He drove his sister's car, which I believe was a Pontiac. No, it was a Chevrolet Impala, 1975 Chevrolet Impala, so pretty new car. But he kept a low profile and stayed with his sister in across from Miami in Biscayne, Florida, Biscayne Bay. Anyway, so he had dinner with Santos Trafficante Jr., who is the boss of the Miami operations, along with Meyer Lansky, the Jewish banking money laundering professional, because he's a big shot in Miami also. But Santos Trafficante is the one that you hear about the most. They try to keep the Jewish bankers out of it. Anyway, so Santos Trafficante had dinner with Johnny Roselli approximately 12 days before his disappearance. Well, on July 16th, we reported, Johnny Roselli's sister reported him missing on the 28th of July, 1976. So let's subtract 28 from 16, and we'll have 12 days. So 12 days before Johnny Roselli went missing and was probably murdered, he had dinner with Santos Trafficante, who is part of the 5 crime families of New York, does business with them, as does Carlos Marcello in New Orleans, the port authority there. And Miami is a port authority. Now, they had dinner in Fort Lauderdale, which is also a port facility, if you didn't know. I've stayed in Fort Lauderdale several times at Pier 66. And that's a port authority. That's the boating capital. The Venice of the United States is Fort Lauderdale. They have a Grand Canal there. I know a lot about it. Anyway, that is where Johnny Roselli and Santos Trafficante dined on July 16, 1976 in Fort Lauderdale. Don't know which restaurant. According to Johnny's sister, on the 28th of July, both Johnny and his sister ate brunch, and then at 12:50 p.m., he drove away in her car, which was a silver 1975 Chevy Impala. He gave no hint that he had an appointment, so she assumed that he was doing some errands and would be back soon. What happened next is described by an unnamed mafia figure, okay? And he claims that Johnny Rosellie drove to a marina nearby and then went aboard a private boat, whereupon he was received by two men, one of whom was an old friend of Johnny Rosellie, and the other was a stranger visiting from Chicago. It's never a good sign. There was a third man, because you know in Gladio they always do teams of three. There's always three men. And there was a third man who took care of the moorings of the boat when it cast off. So in other words, Johnny Rosellie left with a friend and a stranger from Chicago, and there was a third man at the dock who took Johnny Rosellie's car keys and drove Johnny Rosellie's sister's car to the Miami International Airport, where it was later discovered. According to the unnamed source, Johnny Rosellie was sipping a glass of vodka. This would be in the afternoon of July 28th, 1976, and the stranger man from Chicago, grabbed Johnny from behind, held his hand tightly over Johnny Rosellie's nose and mouth until he was asphyxiated, which wasn't as difficult as you might think because Johnny Rosellie was 71 years old and he had emphysema. So essentially this happened about an hour after he boarded the boat, and now he's dead. They then proceeded to pull up on deck an empty metal oil drum, which stood 36 inches tall and was 22 inches in diameter. And so I'm not sure that that's a 55-gallon drum. It seems smaller than that. They drilled a number of, the drum already had a number of holes that had been cut into it so that it would fill up with water and presumably sink. They attempted to stuff Johnny Rosellie's body into the drum, but it wouldn't fit. So then they sawed off his legs so that his body could be stuffed into the drum. It's pretty gruesome. I'm not going to cover all the particulars here. They stuck a tow rope into each side of his abdomen. They weighted the drum down with heavy iron chains, which they laced between the holes that had already been pre-drilled into the drum. They wrapped them around the body and over the lid of the drum, and then they tossed the drum into Biscayne Bay, where it presumably was going to sink. However, it was floating around for 10 days, and it was found at the edge of a sandbar beside a 20-foot deep canal by some fishermen. So 10 days later, some fishermen found it because it never sunk. This murder was the final step in a long slide of Johnny Rosellie's zenith as a Mafia Las Vegas ambassador, not to mention a Hollywood film producer and notable figure of Los Angeles and Orange County. Both Los Angeles and Orange counties, Johnny Rosellie did most of his Mafia career there during Prohibition. And Johnny Rosellie first went to Los Angeles in the early 1930s as part of the Chicago family's gambling, racketeering operations, but also part of the Prohibition bootlegging importation into the Orange County ports of Newport Beach and Costa Mesa area and Huntington Beach. So didn't end very well for Johnny Rosellie. So let's go back now and look at the continuum of chaos that preceded and followed Johnny Rosellie. Because really, you have a series of Mafia supervisors that get whacked. And every one of these people works for the OSS or clandestine services. Now, there's a lot of people that work for the OSS services like Elvil Younger or Paul Caruso or Richard Caballero or Barry Tarlow or Myers Lansky or Carlos Marcello or Santos Traficante, and they didn't get murdered, or it doesn't look like they got murdered. Santos Traficante maybe got murdered, but it's not really clear. He died at 72, 1 year older than Johnny Rosellie. But we had Al Capone, I'm sure you've heard of him, and he had operations in Chicago, and he spent a little time at Alcatraz in San Francisco Bay, but he was released from prison early due to his poor health, and he died in Florida on Palm Island, which I'm assuming is near Palm Beach, Florida, and he was 48 years old. So Al Capone appears to have been put down through a penicillin injection on January 25th, 1947. And 5 months later, we had Ben Bugsy Siegel, and he's shot 9 times, 4 times in his head, where his eyeball gets flying out. And he's killed by an M1 carbine semi-automatic rifle, military, in Beverly Hills, California. And right near the Los Angeles Country Club on, I forgot the name of the street, but anyway, he's near the Playboy Mansion. Ben Siegel, age 41, shot 9 times by a military intelligence rifleman on June 20th, 1947. Then we had the boss of the Prohibition operation of Los Angeles, Jack Dragna, and he was running the show when Johnny Roselli showed up, but Johnny Roselli did not report to him. He went further south to Orange County to get a little bit out of Jack Dragna's franchise. But Jack Dragna was done away with at age 64 on February 23rd, 1956. Then you look at Lucky Luciano, who wasn't very lucky. He got taken out in Naples, at the airport in Naples, Italy, and he was only 64 years old, and he was done away with, I think, with a cyanide-laced cup of tea on January 26, 1962. So that's before the John Kennedy assassination. We already got Al Capone, Ben Siegel, Jack Dragna, and Lucky Luciano. Those are 4 clandestine service soldiers known as mafioso bosses who were, I believe, murdered. Those are 4. Okay? Then we have the John Kennedy assassination, which was planned well over 2 years in the making. 18 months to 2 years of planning went into that. And they had contingency plans to kill John Kennedy in Miami and Chicago, as well as Port Authority, Dallas, Texas. So, bang, bang, we got Jack Kennedy's head blown off, and Jackie picking his brain the size of a softball on her hands and knees, wearing a pencil skirt on the trunk of the Lincoln Continental limousine. So you know that car was parked. There's no way that Jackie Kennedy in a pencil skirt, a pink pencil skirt, is going to be able to do that without losing her balance and ended up in the gutter. So the car was completely halted for quite a while, like perhaps 2 minutes, 90 seconds, more than just a few seconds, as you've heard in false interviews. Oh yeah, the car stopped for a few moments. Yeah, try 2 minutes, because there were Secret Service agents picking up brain parts and tossing them into the car for a while. All right, so anyway, what I wanted to tell you is that as soon as Jack Kennedy got killed, man, a whole bunch of people got done away with. The first one was Guy Bannister, who worked for Clay Shaw. Guy Bannister was a former FBI agent and a private detective and worked for the CIA. And he was done away with at age 63 on June 6, 1964. Then, quick like a bunny rabbit, David Ferry, who was the personal pilot to Carlos Marcello and for Lee Oswald, and worked with Lee Oswald in the Civil Air Defense League, which was created by the guy that owned the school book depository in Dallas, D.H. Byrd. They used to make a joke. He made his money as a wildcat, oil man. He had 27 dry holes, but the 28th one hit the jackpot. So he ends up being able to buy the school book depository, becomes a major stockholder in a company that became General Dynamics. And he's in the oil business, but he's in the defense industry, the military industry. And he owns that building, and he started the Civil Air Patrol, which used David Ferry as an instructor, because he is older, with a Jesuit background, by the way. He's a homosexual, masquerading as a priest, and he was drummed out due to his homosexuality and pushing the envelope over at Eastern Airlines. I won't get into the details there. Anyway, then you have a young Lee Oswald who becomes part of the Civil Air Patrol, again, sort of coordinated by the owner of the school book depository, where Jack Ruby ends up, doing away with Lee Oswald in the basement of the police station on Main Street, like 7 blocks away from where, or 7 or 8 blocks away from where the school book depository was, where, Lee Oswald was not really an employee. He was paid $1.50 an hour there. His previous job paid him $8.50 an hour and gave him $5,000 worth of surveillance and camera equipment, which is Jagger, Childs, Stouffville. Why the heck would you quit that job, Army intelligence job, to go work to move school books around in boxes? And the answer is you wouldn't. He was only there for 4 weeks before the Kennedy assassination, so he was just positioned there as the scapegoat. So David Ferrie's done away with, and he leaves a typed suicide letter. In other words, it's not handwritten. So it's just like the Paul Levy Byrne, Jean Harlow's husband. Then you got Clay Shaw, who goes on trial for the conspiracy to kill Jack Kennedy, and he's miraculously acquitted for murder, and he's the director of the trademark. He was a major in the United States Army. He's CIA all the way. We know that's a fact. That's not speculation. That's a fact. He always denied it at the trial. But 5 years after his death, he was done away with on August 15th, 1974. And in 1979, Richard Helms, the director of CIA at the time, confirmed that Clay Shaw was an operative for the CIA as part of their DCS program. DCS acronym, meaning Domestic Control Services. In other words, Clay Shaw, as the director of the Port Authority of New Orleans, would be an important person for the CIA. You think? Duh. Domestic Control Services. Okay, well, I think that sums it up. Then you got Sam Giancana going bye-bye on June 19th, 1975. He's 67 years old. Clay Shaw was 61 years old. David Ferrie was 48 years old. Lucky Luciano, not so lucky, gets killed at 64. Guy Bannister killed at 63. Jack Drachna killed at 64. Ben Siegel killed at age 41. Al Capone goes bye-bye at age 48. And then we come to Johnny Roselli, Handsome Johnny. He's done away with age 71 on probably July 28th, 1976. Then, quick like a bunny rabbit, we have George de Mohrenschildt that I covered in my last video, and he's shotgun blast murdered by a 47-inch 20-gauge shotgun on March 29th, 1977. So, about 7.5 months after Handsome Johnny goes bye-bye, George de Mohrenschildt is killed in Palm Beach, Florida at age 65. Meanwhile, Meyer Lansky, Carlos Marcello, and Santos Traficante, who dies at age 72 after having heart surgery, dies right away. Evel Younger, Paul Caruso, Richard Caballero, Barry Tarlow, they all go on to sheep dip Sirhan, blame him for the Robert Kennedy assassination, and frame Susan Atkins for putting words in her mouth that she said that Charlie Manson ordered the murder of Sharon Tate and the LaBiancas. And that's memorialized in a book by a Jewish author by the name of Lawrence Schiller from Brooklyn, New York. And he types a book up in 3 weeks called The Killing of Sharon Tate. Copywritten date, publishing date of January 2nd, 1970. So in other words, Lawrence Schiller knows the killers of Sharon Tate before the Los Angeles Police Department knew. That's what kind of an author Lawrence Schiller is. Well, it's all poppycock. It's all made up, and it's all coming out the pie hole of Paul Caruso, who's a mob lawyer, who undoubtedly knew Johnny Roselli, who undoubtedly knew Lino LaBianca. You do know that Lino LaBianca had 11 racehorses, and they were stabled at Santa Anita racetrack. And Johnny Roselli was a stockholder in that racetrack and spent time gambling there. So their paths are crossed because they both work for CIA. Lino works as a money laundering depositor for the drug business for the motorcycle groups of Los Angeles. And Johnny Roselli is a Hollywood producer director type. Well, he's more of a producer for mafioso gangster style films that Hollywood's producing. He's kind of the executive director. His business card read Johnny Roselli strategist. Isn't that hilarious? Anyway, what I wanted to tell you is that the Santa Anita racetrack is a hub for clandestine activity because it's nearby, near Pasadena. It's technically in, I believe it's, let's see where it is. It's called Arcadia. That's close to where Leslie Van Houten went to high school, in case you didn't know. It's just down Colorado Boulevard. I'm sure you've heard that song in a Beach Boys memorialized little old lady from Pasadena. She flies and she flies and she goes real fast on Colorado Boulevard. She's the terror of Colorado Boulevard. Well, if you go down that boulevard far enough, you'll come to Santa Anita Park. Anyway, you should know that Bing Crosby was a stockholder in the Santa Anita racetrack, as were other luminaries like Spencer Tracy, Earl Flynn, Alex Trebek, and let's not forget Louis B. Mayer from MGM, a Jewish-owned production film company. It was frequented by all the stars of the day that I think were required to go there. Betty Grable, Lana Turner, Edgar Bergen, who would be the grandfather, I think, of Candace Bergen, who was dating Doris Day's son, Terry Melcher, and allegedly they lived on the Sharon Tate property, murder scene for a few months. Jane Russell, Cary Grant, Clark Gable, Esther Williams, they all gambled at Santa Anita racetrack, where Lino LaBianca stabled 11 racehorses until one of them broke its leg, had to be put down. He sold 2, and he ended up having 8 racehorses at the time of his bayonet murder. Seabiscuit also raced at Santa Anita track. You should know that Santa Anita track was used as a FEMA camp during World War II to inter 18,000 Japanese Americans who are suspected of being enemy agents. And they lived in the stables and some barracks that were built in the infield at Santa Anita racetrack to house 18,000 Japanese Americans. You think that could ever happen again if we had a vax mandate or something like that? That you could use your local high school or your local elementary school, or you could use your local racetrack to create a FEMA camp? Not to mention, they probably don't want you on Travis Air Force Base because they're running chemtrails out of there every day. Probably don't want to use that base as a FEMA camp. But hey, we got several horse racing tracks in the San Francisco Bay Area. Got Bay Meadows and Golden Gate Fields, so there's 2. And it looks like they can do 18,000 per, so you have 36,000 non-compliant Americans locked up at a horse racing facility. All right, well, that's it for today. Johnny Roselli, Handsome Johnny, got stuffed into a very small oil drum and floating around for 10 days in Biscayne Bay, Florida, whereupon some fishermen happened upon him. And I don't know exactly what he did wrong, but he had a very flamboyant career. He knew everyone. Frank Sinatra sponsored him to join the Friars Club there in Century City, where I've personally been. There was a surveillance operation going on at that Friars Club during card games. They had cameras in the chandeliers to read the cards, and there was a lawsuit about that and a criminal prosecution. And you should know that the lawyer who defended one of the operators of the Friars Club, I don't know if it was Milton Berle. Milton Berle was an owner of the Friars Club, but it was another owner, and that defense lawyer went on to defend Sirhan. He did a really good job with Sirhan, don't you think? He pled him guilty, just like Melvin Belli pled Jack Ruby guilty, so they'd be convicted. All these lawyers are part of the services. All these mob people are part of the services. The services meaning CIA Hollywood, CIA clandestine services. So whether their name is Richard Helms or William Colby, or whether it's his son Carl Colby, who's next door neighbors to Nicole Brown Simpson, it doesn't matter. They're all in the same network. They are all in the same clubs. They go to the same restaurants. They're involved in hundreds of different operations. Don't forget, Dominic Dunn told you what to believe about the O.J. Simpson case. He told you what to believe about the Jose Menendez murder, and Lyle and Eric Menendez, which they're innocent, but according to Dominic Dunn, they're guilty. Of course, he's not to be trusted. And his brother, John Dunn, works for Time Life, and his sister-in-law, Joan Didion, bought the dresses for Linda Kasabian at the Manson trial. So the media is injected themselves into these CIA cover stories. In other words, the media is telling you what to believe, and they're even witnesses in the case, like the case of Janis Joplin's publicist, Myra Friedman, then goes on to become a key witness in the Bernard Goetz case, where she befriends him, tape records 2 of their telephone conversations, writes for the New Yorker magazine about the subway vigilante, and then appears as the star witness for the prosecution against Bernie Goetz, who fortunately has a CIA lawyer from the Bronx, a Jewish man by the name of Barry Slotnick, and so he gets acquitted of murder, or acquitted of assault of 4 boys, none of whom died, in a botched robbery attempt, allegedly. So it's inappropriate to me that members of the media who are so inextricably connected to the criminal case should be telling you what to believe, especially when they're testifying in the trial. That's a conflict of interest. It's inappropriate. It happens all the time. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Have a good one. Bye-bye.